I'm waiting for Felicia. Felicia is one of the panelists. I've got some time.
I don't know. Do you have a presentation?
Sometimes I recall to balance out, I'll sit on my head.
He traced me.
Oh, that's a good trip.
Nice to meet you, man.
No, más de mi como me llora. unajua? From the cocktail. So kuna closing ceremony later. Yeah. I think at 6:30.
Yeah.
It's like,
I mean, I can shut the whole list right out.
do you have any enough? We have
Do you have an adapter for that power outlet over there?
Is it?
This doesn't fit. No, it's wider.
Niliangusha scarf kwa barabara. So let it go. No, hey, that bag.
I have another adapter that moves like this. It's part of the idea that
I only have this time. Hello everyone. So we're just waiting for the room to fill up a little bit and then we can begin. Yeah, so just thank you for your patience. Once we get good enough quorum, then we can begin. Alright.
so I got my contact. Come to the session too.
I'm kind of positioned here, but I know I'm not going to talk to you after the session.
Don't have to just leave a bit of time.
Yeah.
The session is not such a good yeah, it's
Because you mentioned you are it's an open source group, so it's something that
you are in easy.
yeah, not me, it's him, but I will manage to work here sometimes when I'm not doing it.
I mean, you are.
Oh, that's far from you. No, it's a bus ride. It's not far.
I can take the train.
Yeah. So I'll introduce the concept to section.
Yeah. It's easy to set up.
It is, yeah? Oh, so maybe I can even show them. After I check you.
Yeah. Oh, if you bring your laptop, you
Yeah.
can leave the session with a free VPN server.
Oh.
Your credit card to set up an account, but
Yeah.
you will need to pay for the service.
Okay.
Just for
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks. Looking forward to the session.
does he run through active days or what?
As well, yeah. We do everything.
But only of the DNS stuff.
Many things actually. Like I don't know, Tor directory, so these are like base block. Yeah, DOH services are like base block.
Yeah. So hello everyone. My name is Moses Kowi. I work with the Kenya Human Rights Commission. I'd like to thank you for your patience. The session after lunch, obviously, it's a bit tricky because people perhaps taken by lunch. So welcome to this session. It's a panel on internet shutdowns in Africa and how that impacts election monitoring. With me, I have three co-panelists whom I'm giving the opportunity to introduce each other. We have Kemal from Benin, Felicia, who works with Access Now, and also Victor Dede, who works with Amnesty Kenya. So perhaps before we begin, I'd just pass the mic around for them to introduce themselves, and then we'll get into the crux of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Moses. So my name is Kemal Afagnon, and I'm from Benin Republic. I work for Internet Without Borders, Internet Sans Frontières. I'm in charge of the West French-speaking countries in Africa. So basically, Benin, where I'm from, and the other countries like Senegal, Togo, Mali, and in those countries, we noticed that thanks to the mobile phone now, populations are able to communicate, and it's actually, and with those mobile phones, the populations are able to play an important role during elections. But at the same time, those countries are facing now internet shutdown, so we are going to talk about it today and see how the situation is in West Africa. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Felicia Antonio. I work with Access Now as the Keep It On campaign manager. Keep It On is a global campaign against internet shutdowns, and so this topic is very much important to the work that we do under the campaign.
Thank you. Afternoon, my name is Victor Mbebe. I work with Amnesty International Kenya. My work covers digital rights. I lead the digital rights program there, covering largely two areas: one on data governance and the second on digital rights for children. And so internet shutdowns are, of course, a contemporary issue within the digital rights discourse. Thank you.
All right, very well. Thank you to the panelists for the brief introduction. So I think we will kickstart the conversation now, and what we've witnessed over the past 3 years is internet shutdowns are becoming very common in Africa as a means of government control for information, and this is particularly so during times of elections, during times of political events, or during times of protests. So we've seen these shutdowns happen in a number of African countries. Access Now do documentation around shutdowns, and Felicia will be able to share with us more on that. But we thought we'd focus more on how this impacts elections, because elections are perhaps the most the process that citizens, the most participatory citizen process that citizens engage with in a country. So how do internet shutdowns then affect such a monumental process in countries where most times in African countries citizens don't have any other avenue of engaging with governments apart from while they're putting people in charge to run their governance affairs. So we're going to look at some of the interventions that we undertook during shutdowns in countries like Tanzania, countries like Uganda, There's currently an ongoing shutdown in Ethiopia, which is perhaps not related to elections, but it's persisted in parts of the countries for very long. So yeah, so that's the brief context of internet shutdowns in Africa. And at this juncture, I would just like to pose the question to Kemal and the other panelists. How do we quantify or how do we categorically say that a country has shut down the internet? Like, what are the metrics to sort of like the metrics to sort of confirm that a country is going through internet shutdowns, and not necessarily technical glitches that platforms are facing? For example, we've seen instances where WhatsApp has gone down and we cannot quantify such as internet shutdowns. So Kemal, how would we define internet shutdowns, and what are the thresholds that need to be met for it to consider that the internet has been shut down in a particular country?
I mean, I will start with a quick definition, but based on what we've been observing in our country that we covered. So basically, those shutdowns happen sometimes, and they make the communication impossible for populations. So basically, like if you use a mobile phone like to communicate or to make business, for example, you are not able to use it. And we noticed that it happens sometimes ahead of elections. So basically, it happens sometimes around elections. And in Chad, for example, we were quite like following the situation in Chad, and we noticed that, for example, in the last years, the government was able to shut down like for a long period, like almost 3 years, so 2.5 years, and we've been doing a lot of negotiation with the government in order to preserve the right of freedom of information of the population. The thing is that now, based on the statistic, we noticed that for this half period of the year, the number of internet shutdown has reduced in comparison with 2019. So that means that the work that we are doing is somehow paying. But when you look at a country like Chad, it's interesting because though this country knows that we are following what the authorities are doing, they were recently able to buy a technology. It's a cartography technology, and in theory, with cartography, you can run a lot of civilian projects, as I was saying. Like you can promote a lot of things. But and this cartography technology was sold for 8 million for a country like Chad, which is very poor. And what we discover is that this technology is now used to provide VIP security for the authorities in Chad, and also to like to crush on the population, to beat the people when there is protest. So they are basically able to see with the cartography how the people are making the mobilization. And it's the same company running this technology who's now doing the land mapping in Uganda. So in Chad, we have a country with a regime, a military regime, which has almost some of the same characters as Uganda. So it's going to see, we will be following the situation and see how with this technology the country will adapt to the internet shutdowns, and how the human rights situation will evolve in those two countries.
Thank you very much, Kemal, for sharing what you've witnessed in Chad and your home country, Benin, in terms of internet shutdowns. So, to Felicia, I'd basically like to pose to you the question, are internet shutdowns a form of censorship, and how do we quantitatively say that internet shutdown has happened in a particular country? So what are the metrics that as an organization you use to quantify that a country is in a situation of internet shutdown?
Okay, basically I would say that an internet shutdown happens when your government decides that they don't want you to express yourself, or they don't want the information you are sharing to get out there. So it's an intentional thing, and I want us to emphasize this point in this session, that let's say if there's a technical disruption of the internet or a cable cut resulting in loss of connection, that is not an intentional internet shutdown. We hope that, we don't expect governments to start cutting cables intentionally to prevent people from accessing the internet. But what we've monitored and documented over the years is that usually a government would issue an order to ISPs or to the regulator of internet in a particular country, asking them to shut down the internet. You can shut down the internet in different ways. The government can authorize the ISPs, that is the internet service providers, to slow down internet speed, which is called throttling, or shut down social media platforms, or cut internet access completely. And this means that you won't be able to access like the usual things you use the internet for. So these are the ways that the internet can be disrupted. Sometimes you can have all three ways happening in one particular incident, in the sense that prior to elections, you can, I think in Uganda, we observed that in December the previous year, that was December 2020, the internet speed was being slowed down. And then on elections, around elections, the government shut down social media. And then, I think eve of elections, the internet was shut down completely. So that is how it works. Sometimes the internet will be shut down after elections is restored, or until election results are announced. So the question is, what exactly is the purpose? What are you hiding? Why would you want to keep your people or deny them access to information? And so we've seen that internet shutdowns also kind of question the credibility of elections. Whenever the government shuts down the internet, you might have people protesting the outcome of the election results. In terms of the other ways internet shutdown, or the human rights aspect of it, clearly it's going to deny people access to information about the electoral processes. Even the politicians themselves will not be able to reach the people or the voters that they want to speak to. And then, most importantly, journalists and human rights defenders, election observers would not also be able to monitor and document what is happening in a particular country. And so it's important for civil society to prepare. It's also important for us to engage with the various governments and authorities in countries prior to elections, during elections, and even after elections, to make sure that they understand what we are saying by when we say internet shutdowns, and why they shouldn't shut down the internet, because it violates fundamental human rights, and it also costs governments a lot of money. As an activist, I like to focus on the human rights aspect, and I don't think governments should stop shutting down the internet because they are losing money. They should see it as important not to shut down the internet because it violates the human rights of their people, and not because of the money that they would be losing. So these are some of the ways that we monitored and tracked internet shutdowns. And I think it's fair for me to also say that there are other countries that have had elections and have not shut down the internet, like Kenya, that recently had elections, and maybe Victor will speak about that in his response. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felicia, and you raised some salient points, especially on the justifications that government give to shut down the internet during the elections. They normally cite national security concerns, issues around public safety. They shut down the guys that they're trying to prevent, sort of like online disinformation and misinformation. So those are some of the justifications that governments use to shut down this internet, wholesome shutdowns on the internet in entire countries. And one of the sessions that we attended the previous 2 days when we started this forum, we were taken through some of the justifications through international legal frameworks that can be given to sort of like justify internet shutdowns. And one of the reasons was that internet shutdowns, if a justification was to happen to abuse digital rights, it will be a justification based on proportionality. And when you wholesomely shut down the internet in entire countries, entire populations, the issue of proportionality is not covered in that respect. So I'll then segue to Victor and just pose to you the question, what are some of the trends that you're witnessing in Africa, especially in terms of internet shutdowns? And what are some of the countries that are facing internet shutdowns, and how common is it for internet shutdowns to occur in Africa?
Thank you very much for your question, Moses. Before I come to answer your question, one of the things I think that we have to, or we ought to put clearly out there is that internet shutdowns violate a lot of rights. So we move from freedom of expression. You have issues on access to information. You have issues around freedom of association or the right to associate. You even have the aspect where people earn income from the platforms or online, also having their right to earn an income, of course, violated. In an election context, when you look at an internet shutdown, a lot of the decisions that voters make, a lot of the choices that voters make are informed by whatever they get on the information sphere. And so if we violate the information sphere to the extent that we cannot say that voters had the right to freely and in an informed manner make a decision, then an internet shutdown violates that right to vote, because and I'll speak perhaps for the Kenyan context, where voters have the right to make a free and informed choice, and ordinarily without any intimidation or threat. So if at all a majority of our population relies on the internet for their information, and we move on to shut down the internet, then in a sense we're saying let voters go blind into this election. And that creates a problem, because then that means that you either end up with bad leaders, you either end up with wrong choices made by voters, and ideally affect the entire political ecosystem. And so, while at it, for countries that have really advanced in terms of the use of the internet, there also comes the aspect that, the aspect around the right to associate. And an election, for me and for most of us, we know is that the election is not an event that happens on the day people slot in those papers into the ballot. The election is a process, right from the campaigning period, and you've seen circumstances where there have been internet restrictions around the campaigning period. A lot of us nowadays engage each other and ourselves on internet platforms. So you'd have stuff to do, like stuff with Twitter Spaces. You'd have various WhatsApp groups, Facebook groups, where people actually exercise their right to associate because they're brought together by a common issue. So if at all we shut down the internet, then it effectively means that these people's right to associate is equally affected, because then these people who would ordinarily not come to the street or come to a public meeting that is a physical gathering, are denied their chance to engage and exchange ideas. The last thing, perhaps, before I go into the countries, is also the aspect of the media. A lot of us and many people across, and if I do the Kenya example, you see that we have a digital media. A lot of the Kenyans, and I believe in the majority of our countries, people consume a lot of their news from digital media and largely through the internet. And so, in an election context still, while a shutdown on the internet could mean that the media cannot, people cannot access information, it also affects media freedoms, because then it means that the media is not effectively able to do their work of keeping the population informed. And so that creates a problem, because one, of course, you're violating two rights in there at once, but the other thing again goes to the quality of information around that election period. And we all know, in the absence of credible, verifiable media, is where we have this problem of disinformation, because we now have the sprouting of multiple unverified news sources that people rely on to make decisions, and that lets such a shutdown would allow such channels of communication to thrive, and in any case, disinform the public. And so it is important that we look at the shutdowns, especially in the African continent, in the context of when you look at it in the context of election, to look at all these rights that are affected, because the media plays a watchdog role. Majority of us in civil society play a watchdog role, and most of the information we get, how we put our information across and how we receive information, is through the internet. And so, in any event that the internet is shut down in any of its three forms, then it also means that our watchdog role then gets violated, and it then means that the state actors are able to operate without any form of watchdogging on them. So when you come to the countries, and most of the context I wanted to bring in about is of the ruling party or the ruling government, so that the opposition lacks the channel. And you see, when we go back to the rights I mentioned, the right to associate is a very important right that we exercise and engage in online. So if you shut down the internet, then clearly the opposition folks are not able to exchange information, to freely express themselves, and to even associate on these online platforms. And that has largely been the context of why we've witnessed some of the shutdowns we have been able to see on the continent. The other important thing is shutdowns are actually veils or curtains that governments use to mask human rights violations. Because the internet is a channel for information flow, and the internet is borderless, as we all know. The moment information is published online, it goes far and wide. And so, if government shuts down the internet, or governments shut down the internet around an election, it means that either there's a plan to, of course, commit mass human rights violations, or actually there are human rights violations that are happening, but the government does not want to go out to the internet. And so that has also been the context of why the internet has been shut down around elections, to mask these rights violations. I think I'll stop at that, Moses.
Thank you so much, Victor, for those insights. And you've painted a clear picture of the reality why governments implement shutdowns, which is either to quell protest, silent dissent, or control information, and more importantly, the point you made about covering up violations. So with that respect, you've also established that the internet enhances participatory government, because it offers an avenue for citizens to engage with elected leaders, and also to share information on electoral processes in the country. And something that Felicia also mentioned was the importance of engaging members of parliament, legislators, and the candidates in an election, just to make them aware that internet shutdowns equally affect them. Because nowadays we see mobilization for voters happening a lot on digital spaces. So in a way, to circumvent this, make them see the cost of the internet shutdown on them as political aspirants, so that it can become clear to them that you're also losing an avenue of mobilizing your constituencies in instances where internet shutdowns occur. To Kemal, perhaps I pose to you the question, like, what are some of the precipitors of internet shutdowns in African countries, especially during elections? What motivates governments to shut down the internet, and what ways are you seeing these trends unfold in the work that you do in your organization?
Thank you, Moses. I think that the main motivation that push government to shut down internet is a term that I don't like very much. I mean, it's the national security. So basically, they will mention that, but I don't know what does it mean, because like national security is like a gray term actually. So, and in my opinion, government decided to shut down internet because the political dialogue is not working in their country. So basically, the political dialogue is weak. You are not able to communicate in a good way with opposition leaders, for example, and because you're afraid that information that are not in your favor goes public, then you shut down internet. So basically, this is one of the trends that we are observing in the country that we follow. And since a couple of years or so, we noticed that some countries are shutting down internet ahead of public exams. So you have countries like Algeria, like Ethiopia, and like Somalia, who proceed to this shutdown. And I mean, they will tell you that it's to avoid the leak of those exams. But you know, in my country also, we run every year exam, like and we never. I mean, though Benin was in 2019 able to shut down internet for political reason, we never shut down internet for a reason linked to the examinations, for example. So I think that for those countries, they should, for example, see how they could reorganize the way the examination system is managed, because if you get some exams on internet, that means that the leak is coming from somewhere. And then in Algeria, for example, though the government was able to shut down internet, like the students were able to get those exams when the internet was back actually. So even they were able to get some notes during the examinations actually. So this reason is not sustainable, and we need to see and see how we can fix this issue, because once again, when you shut down internet during an exam, of course you penalize like the populations who communicate. This impacts also the freedom of expression, and it also has an impact on businesses. So and I don't think that countries who are not economically stable can go and follow this path.
Thank you very much, Kamal, for those insights. To finish here, basically transition to telecom companies, which telecommunication companies, which are the ones that are usually effectively used by governments to sort of like turn off the switch on the internet, so to speak. Do you think that telecommunications company have a role in terms of standing up to government regimes, just so that the access, we keep it on, as you say?
Yes, I think telcos have a role to play, especially because they are the ones that receive the orders from governments, and they are the ones that kill the kill switch. So I think they have an important role to play. Having said that, we've engaged with telcos and we've demanded accountability, and they have the responsibility to also protect human rights under the UN General Principles for businesses. And so I think that they should take concrete steps to push back against these shutdowns rather than just agreeing to shut down the internet? Are there ways they can make the governments struggle to shut down the internet? When you receive an order from the government to shut down the internet, ask for a warrant. Like, is there any legal backing for this shutdown? Sometimes we are even informed that governments can pick up like the phone and call maybe one ISP and ask them to shut down the internet, and they just go ahead and do it. So we need them to be transparent, we need them to push back, we need them to also show that they care about human rights and they are here to protect us and not to violate the rights of people that pay for the services they provide. So I think telcos have an important role to play. Having said this, I would like to acknowledge that some of the reasons they've normally given is that they have licenses being given to them by these governments, and so once you resist the shutdown, you might face some consequences, and so that is a clear reality and challenge we acknowledge, but then they shouldn't also make it so easy for governments to keep shutting down the internet, because we do all have challenges we face in carrying out our duties, and so that doesn't mean you should just give in because the president of a country has ordered you to shut down the internet. So these are some of the ways that I would like to suggest.
Yeah, and I think that's quite an important suggestion, because if telcos make it hard for governments to basically give the quick switch orders, then in a way we can already begin preventing such shutdowns from happening. And to Victor now, having open internet promotes transparency and openness in electoral process. And on the other hand, shutdowns taint elections and destroy integrity around elections. How do you think citizens can engage and actively participate in elections, even in contexts where the internet has been cut off in their countries during election times?
That's an interesting question. So I think the first is, of course, to call that citizens should never be comfortable with the internet being shut down, so that they're able to engage in alternative organizing around an election. But be that as it may, of course, there are circumstances where the internet is shut down and citizens are still expected to participate in elections and organizing around the elections. So the first thing I'll say is that when it comes to citizens, a lot has been said about and I think during this forum we've had a lot about the circumvention tools, which I think Felicia would be better placed to talk about them. But importantly is there are circumstances where even during the shutdowns, some of these circumvention tools have not worked. You can look at the case of Uganda, for example, where the government was still able to block a couple of those VPNs that people were using, and still render people unable to use, people are still unable to use the internet. My view has always been, and I think guided by the context of what has happened in a lot of the African countries, my view has been we need to scale up citizen-led advocacy on internet shutdowns. One is because in some of the discussions we've had, especially in Kenya, internet shutdowns are viewed to be foreign things first. The second thing is that it is viewed to only affect social media, and so people see it as it only affects Facebook, it only affects WhatsApp, and so I'm easy so long as that's the only thing they're touching. But what people don't know is that one, in allowing those shutdowns to happen and in being nonchalant about it or or imagining that it only affects social media, is that governments are increasingly encouraged then to shut down, which means that they see that citizens are not opposed to this, and governments are not to borrow an inch and take a mile. The second thing about citizen engagement on advocacy on internet shutdowns is also understanding, though Felicia mentioned, of course, ensuring governments respect the right to an open and free internet just because they are human rights. I'll say, based on the case study that perhaps we could talk about Kenya, we are slightly, actually more or less a month since the general elections in 2022. And of course it has been lauded as the election that Kenya did not shut down the internet. One of the things I'd like to say in advocacy around keeping the internet on during the Kenyan elections, there were a couple of activities that actually happened. And of course, a lot of the sector players were really concerned when we had the government unprovoked and questioned just saying that we will not shut down the internet during the election. So initially it was very suspicious. But when some follow-up was done, especially with the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Interior in Kenya, we did realize that there was advocacy that had gone towards keeping the internet on. And in advocacy, all the cards were on the table, from the human rights case, the economic case, and the political case to keep the internet on. And in my view, these are cases that also have to be made with the citizens of a country to understand the political cost of an internet shutdown, the economic cost of an internet shutdown, and the social cost of an internet shutdown. Because if I start first with the political cost of an internet shutdown, one of the things that the Kenyan government was concerned about shutting down the internet was that in the event that they shut down the internet, and borrowing from the experiences of other countries, it is highly likely that people would have come to the street because you've denied them an avenue to express themselves on. And no government wants people on the streets for a continuous number of days. So that was a political cost they looked at. And for governments that have an agenda to keep their PR game at the top, that was a concern to them. And so, if you look at how the Arab Spring went, the Sudan protest went, immediately the internet was shut down, the protests spiraled into something worse than they were on the online platform. So that was more or less the political cost, and that was made very clear to government of Kenya folks. On the economic side of things, and I think Felicia had alluded to some of this, Kenya is a financial sort of hub for the region. A lot of the banks do run their financials from Nairobi. We have all these tech startups for cash transfer and running their payment systems through Nairobi. And just the e-commerce, the value of e-commerce within the Republic of Kenya is at a significantly high level comparatively across the region. And so there was also that economic cost that was made very clear to the government. And this largely came from the actors within the fintech space. Come to the social cost and just sharing with the government on what really would be the social impact of shutting down the internet. What's a very important activity that comes once every 5 years in the name of an election. And this was made very clear to them. The point I'm driving at, Moses, as I come to a close, is that the conversation and the advocacy around internet shutdown, for me, is a multifaceted and multi-stakeholder conversation. If we keep it as a CSO-led activity, it looks like purely a human rights agenda. While yes, it is, there are other factors to always consider. And our aim is to keep the internet on, and to get to that end, we can get as much allies as we can from these other sectors that are equally stakeholders in the internet, so that the political cost, the economic cost, and the social cost of an internet shutdown is made very clear. And you would see, because the government, once it got a lowdown of this all these sorts of costs that it was looking at. Government called the platforms. So there was a sort of a secret meeting between government, Google, Meta, and I think Twitter was also there, and discussed mitigation measures, because government's only way to shutting down the internet at that time was on disinformation, which, to be very honest, was at a very pervasive level in these 2022 elections in Kenya. And so platforms were required to give government a plan on how they were going to mitigate against disinformation. So, in a nutshell, my view has been it needs all hands on deck to push the fight to keep it on. It needs citizens to equally understand that it has a political, social, and economic cost. And once they own this, we also have a citizen-led push to keep it on, so that it's no longer a preaching to the choir or the converted. Thank you.
Very interesting, Victor. The salient points that you raised there is one way of sort of circumventing internet shutdowns is beginning advocacy prior to the elections, where you establish to the government that the cost of the shutdown will be, the political cost will be ABCD. So just beginning advocacy early enough so that the government then knows what the cost of shutting down the internet will be. So it becomes sort of a prohibitive factor for shutting down elections. Another important point you raised is around an engaged citizenry, where, for example, you give the example of Kenya, where people on social media were adamant that if the government will proceed to shut down elections, shut down the internet, they would go to the streets and march and basically force the hand of the government based off of this protest. So those are some preemptive measures that not only civil society, because you mentioned a multi-stakeholder approach towards combating internet shutdown elections, but I'm really impressed by those those actions pre-elections that can be able to sort of like nudge the government towards keeping the internet on. And I think for now, I'll go to a case example of the election monitoring that we did in Tanzania. So in 2020, the government of Tanzania held an election. The election was held under very severe COVID situations. As you might have seen through the news or through social media platforms, Tanzania didn't take any prohibitive or precautionary measures against COVID-19. There weren't lockdowns, people could associate easily, and people were not wearing masks. So the period coinciding with the elections, there were news coming out of Tanzania of a COVID scare. So most international monitors, your standard international monitors, did not travel to Tanzania to monitor the elections because of obviously the existing COVID conditions in the country. At the same time also, Tanzania passed a law called Miscellaneous Amendments Act number 3, which really stifled civil society organizing, gave the government powers to really claw down on civil society. And any civil society organization that was critical of the government, people were either being jailed or they would face threats of violence or they'd get arrested. So the situation in Tanzania was such that it was very difficult to get alternative information coming out of the country based off of the election that was going on. And in Tanzania, we also saw like there was a very heavy repression of the opposition politicians, a lot of arrests, a lot of attacks on opposition buildings and such. So based off of these factors, the Kenya Human Rights Commission, together with other actors, the Open Society Initiative, and an organization in Tanzania called Kituo cha Katiba, established a model of monitoring elections in the country despite these precarious contexts that existed. So with that regard, the Kenya Human Rights Commission and our other partners, we created an initiative called Tanzania Elections Watch, which aimed to offer solidarity to Tanzanians by disseminating the human rights and electoral justice situation in Tanzania. And this involved spearheading outreach to African organizations such as the AU and other regional mechanisms that could sort of like give independent oversight on the political process in Tanzania. So we conceptualized the Tanzania Elections Watch to have three elements to it. So we established a panel of eminent persons. So these are very popular democratic actors in Africa, consisting of former chief justices and other well-respected leaders from the African continent. So we constituted a regional panel consisting of actors from the East Africa community and other actors from the South Africa, the SADC bloc. And we, so this panel will sort of be the face of this Elections Watch in Tanzania, which we dubbed Tanzania Elections Watch. So it consisted of around 8 individuals, and their mandate was to reach out to the regional African organizations such as the AU. So these are people who have access to the AU, these are people who have access to the regional mechanisms around electoral justice in Africa. So the eminent panel was also tasked with releasing regular press statements on the situation in Tanzania. And the actual situation is that in Tanzania we get from the organization domiciled in Tanzania, where we deployed monitors, around 200 of them in Tanzania, and they'll be giving us this information which we would corroborate with journalists who are in the country. So the situation was such that Tanzania had a total internet shutdown. So social media was off, and all these other digital media platforms were off. And the media in Tanzania is also very much regulated by the state. So there wasn't any other alternative clear story coming out of Tanzania besides what the state was spewing through the national broadcaster. Through this initiative called Tanzania Elections Watch, we developed social media accounts under the name Tanzania Elections Watch, which mobilized people around the continent to offer solidarity to Tanzania. And as of now, I think the social media account has close to 10,000 followers. So using this account, we share out and disseminate to audiences outside Tanzania, painting to them a clear picture of the situation in Tanzania. And we undertook an aggressive occupation of social media, just sort of like to give the real play of things of the situation in Tanzania. The other aspect of social media advocacy was to mobilize conscious social media voices. So we reach out to people who are influencers, people who have a huge social media following, people who have some level of influence on social media, and we mobilize them to also shine a light on the situation that was happening in Tanzania. So through social media engagement, through the eminent panel that we constituted, we were able to paint to the outside world the situation that was happening in Tanzania. So, and in this way, we were able to sort of like circumvent what the government was trying to do, which is to suppress information coming out of the country. And we also had pretty much regular media engagements, where we release regular press statements, and some of these press statements were covered by big media organizations such as Reuters, the local media organizations in Kenya, and other small media which are independent in Tanzania. And another arm of the Tanzania Elections Watch was to establish an urgent action response where, for example, if any of the monitors were in distress in Tanzania, then we have, we collaborated with Amnesty International East Africa, and also the CPJ, which I think is it's a journalist organization. So it's a journalist that protects. It's an organization that protects journalists. So we collaborated with the CPJ and also Amnesty International East Africa to be on standby and respond to support the compatriots who are on the ground in Tanzania and the compatriots who are actually giving us this information. So. In terms of documentation, we established a website called Tanzania Elections Watch that will now host all this information that we are getting from Tanzania. So, in a nutshell, that is the method that we use to monitor the elections in Tanzania, and this culminated in perhaps the only independent observer report that came out of the Tanzania election. Another report came out, I think, this year around May by an organization called Journalists for Justice. But up to that point, it was only the report by Tanzania Elections Watch, which we have disseminated to the African Union mechanisms and other regional mechanisms to paint sort of like a clear picture of what was happening in Tanzania. So we had other actors within the country, but for security reasons, they opted not to be very visible in terms of being the face of this initiative. That's why we established a panel of eminent persons who would ordinarily face the threats that citizens domiciled in Tanzania would have faced. So what worked best of this approach? So through this approach where we established this eminent persons panel, we took active occupation of social media. And social media management and website management was being done in Kenya that had internet access. So you have content coming out regularly on the real situation in Tanzania, and we amplify this in the media, where we got a lot of support from especially international media organizations. So what worked is we were able to document the election in Tanzania as it was, despite the well-orchestrated efforts by the Tanzanian government under John Magufuli at that time to suppress any information to come out. So through the website, through the Twitter accounts, and the external report on the electoral observation that took place in Tanzania, we were able to document the electoral process in Tanzania. And through this documentation, we subsequently improved awareness of regional and global actors on the electoral context in Tanzania. And also, through the regular press statements that were being issued by the panel, we could give early warning systems for citizens in Tanzania or for other external actors. For example, where we anticipated violence would occur in certain areas, or where we anticipated imminent arrest of some of the opposition actors or some of the civil society actors, we issued press statements that would give early warning to sort of anticipate this horrible situation that we are anticipating. And ultimately, through all this, we were able to generate response from key regional and international actors on the elections in Tanzania. So while this approach is limited because we didn't have widespread presence in the country, we only deployed around 200 monitors, and they were not enough to cover the whole breadth of Tanzania. And also, mostly this approach was targeting people outside Tanzania, because Tanzania, as a country, had a lot of repression, and people within the country could not engage with us. So most of the people we were engaging were people outside Tanzania, and mostly Tanzanians in the diaspora, and also other Africans interested in the elections in Tanzania. And ultimately, the government got its way, but we can say we documented the process. And in that effect, I think the model was very efficient in terms of not putting the people who are most at risk in terms of the leaders of the civil society organizations that were part of this initiative, not putting them as the face of the organization, and sort of like shielding them from the risk that would have come if they're doing the advocacy directly using the institutions. So it was a sort of like a creative model that has its limitations, but of course it yielded also quite considerable success in its implementation. We tried to develop sort of like an engine that would be used to sort of like by the observers on the ground to relay the information to us. It was to be an SMS supported, so that document through SMS and relay the information to us. But that particular component of this implementation did not work. So that's what we're trying to refine, so that we can have a way of actually getting data from the ground that is not tedious on observers, because now the observers had to literally do text messages, sometimes do very extensive phone calls, so that we can get the information about the real situation in the country. And also this involved a lot of collaboration with the international media actors that were domiciled in Tanzania. So in that respect, that was also another limitation to this exercise. But I'm glad we have people in the room like the gentleman from Uniprobe, who perhaps will be able to enlighten us on some of the tools that you can use to better effectively get data and get real-time information in situations where we are facing shutdowns. So quickly moving on from the situation in Tanzania, Uganda also held an election in 2021, in January 2021, and the situation in Uganda was also very similar to what happened in Tanzania. Yoweri Museveni was seeking another term against opposition candidate Bobi Wine, who faced a lot of repression in terms of government really clamping down on him and other opposition actors. The civil society in Uganda equally were very restricted in terms of how much they could do in terms of monitoring of the situation in Uganda. And also the Ugandan government did partial accreditation of observers. So they essentially just allowed in observers into the country who they thought were friendly to them, and people who were deemed to be critical were not given observer status. So even the US Embassy in Uganda at that time did not receive accreditation status to observe the election in Tanzania, and so a lot of embassies withdrew their election observation teams in Uganda. And also in Uganda, during that time, it was under COVID-19 period, and COVID-19 was used to sort of like really blow down on opposition supporters and opposition gatherings. We saw situations where the opposition candidate, Robert Kyagulanyi, also known as Bobi Wine, was severely arrested for organizing rallies, political rallies on the guise of enforcement of the COVID-19 measures. So in Tanzania, we also deployed the same model as we did in Tanzania, which was establishing this eminent of a panel of eminent persons to sort of like be the face of this initiative that this time around we dubbed it Africa Elections Watch, because we realized the tendency of internet shutdowns would sort of persist across elections in Tanzania. In Africa rather, and if we were to use this model, it will be very counterproductive to every time we go into an election, we start afresh. So for example, if you're going into Uganda, we start afresh and have to institute Uganda Elections Watch. So we decided to adopt a general name, Africa Elections Watch, that will now be the body sort of like mandated with undertaking elections observation in particularly difficult situations where shutdowns occur and where the government is very hostile towards other independent observers. So we established the African Elections Watch to observe the elections in Tanzania, where we established the eminent persons panel consisting of actors from the East Africa community and also other actors who are sort of like people who have a voice in Africa who are sort of like interested in the Tanzania elections. So we also established social media platforms under the Africa Elections Watch, and the platform really gained a lot of following. I think up to now it has close to 1,000 followers, because we began this in January 2021, and the elections, barely 2 weeks to the election. The election was in January 14th. So similarly, we undertook a lot of social media activity, basically sharing real-time information on the situation in Tanzania. We supplemented this with regular press releases, and also instituted the urgent action team response, so that if anybody who we are working with, or anybody who's a civil society actor was in distress, then we would quickly mobilize and initiate an urgent action response. So that is the model that we deployed in Tanzania and Uganda. Obviously, it has its weaknesses, but to the extent that we deployed it, I think it worked pretty well, because from it we culminated to document the entire process. We were able to improve awareness and interest from regional actors on the electoral context in Tanzania and Uganda. We were able to also
measure censorship as well, and they are able to sometimes measure from outside of the network, which can work well in some places and give you more data. Oh, sorry. And we have a session on outline after this.
It appears you have a question, but thank you very much, Vinny. Those are very important suggestions. Outline VPN, so everyone obviously reach out to Vinny and attend the next session after this on outline VPN. And I think what is interesting about what you're saying is how we need to do public awareness among citizens in situations where we anticipate internet shutdowns on VPNs, and not only VPNs, but which ones are safe. Because you say the taxi people are using some form of VPN, only that they can't remember the name. And sometimes the risk that comes with that you don't know which VPN is safe, and you don't know which one is being used to sort of like pry on you or pry on your communications. So important suggestions, and also the suggestion on engaging with opposition politicians and human rights defenders, and basically educating them as well on internet on VPNs rather, and mechanisms of circumventing shutdowns is important. So thank you for the valuable contributions. So at this point, I think I'd like to invite questions from the room, beginning with the lady at the back. So perhaps you just introduce yourself with your name, and then you can proceed to ask your question. Thank you.
My name is Brenda Zulu. I actually went with Felicia and Vinny. I'm just meeting them here for the first time. So we were at the back end. We were the ones which run the Keep It On campaign in Zambia. So I have a question. Zambia is one of the countries which will be accessing Elon Musk's Starlink internet direct to the phones. So just want to ask, what should we envisage with satellite communication? In terms of shutdowns,
It's a very technical question.
So yeah, you want to know satellite wow?
Yeah, I want to know if it's possible for the government to shut down after introducing Elon Musk in the country.
So like whether like satellite can be helpful and efficient during shutdown scenarios. So satellite is very helpful like for natural disasters and for when you have collaboration on the ground, because you need equipment on the ground to get satellite. Like Starlink is able to make these kind of relatively small antennas, but you can still go after the antennas and destroy them. So that's something to keep in mind. Before Starlink, it was even harder because you needed like more equipment and more collaboration. So I think it's probably getting better. Like once introduced in the country, it's probably harder to block unless you go after and destroy the harbor. So that seems promising.
So are there any more questions?
All right. So thank you very much, everyone, for your patience and for attending the session. Kemal, maybe I'll just pass the mic on to you for a minute or so, just to give a parting shot based off of the discussions that you've had, and we'll have Victor as well give a parting shot. So yeah, so Kemal, over to you.
Thank you. So I mean, as I said when I started my started session, the work we are doing regarding internet shutdowns is like for this first period of the year, the number is decreasing. Though Africa was actually getting on the top of the continents where you could observe this tendency. But it's not like the final victory, so we should keep like pushing forward. And as I mentioned also, since we saw that like autocratic regime, like Chad, for example, is turning to cartographic technology, it could be good to see also what kind of strategy they will use in the near future, right? Because I remember a report that was published by CIPESA, I think in 2019, when they tried to make like a link between internet shutdown and autocratic regime, mentioning that the more you stay in power, the more you have the intention to shut down internet. So it would be good to see how it works, because now we will be having autocratic regime who can use of course this technology for security reasons to crush protests. But also when you have a regime who stay so long in power, you have a stability. And now we are entering in the era of this economy of data. And if you have a stability, you can make business, for example. So it would be good to see how those regimes, even if they don't shut down internet, how they proceed with innovation in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Kemal. So basically what you're saying is the people in power and the people who tend to stay in power, they're also learning. Governments are aware of VPNs right now. Governments are increasingly learning at a very high scale. They realize the importance of internet platforms, so they're equally adapting. So we really need to keep on upping our game so that we can circumvent. But the ultimate goal, of course, Felicia, is to always advocate for the internet to be on. So on that point, perhaps just give a parting shot before I hand over to it.
I'll just say that let's continue the work that we are all doing. It's very important. Fighting internet shutdowns requires collective efforts. It's not just one person's responsibility, or it doesn't just affect one person. Whether you fight it or not, when the shutdown happens, you are going to be affected. And so let's work together, let's collaborate with each other, and let's support the campaigns or the efforts of various organizations in the fight to bring an end to this rights harming practice that is growing across the globe. If you would want to stay in touch, you can, of course, I can leave my contact with you if you don't have it, or just use the Keep It On hashtag on Twitter, and we would receive whatever information you want to share with us. Or you can just reach out to me on Twitter as well, and we can work together. The Keep It On Coalition, the membership is open to civil society organizations. And so if you are a civil society organization here and you haven't joined the coalition, trust me, you don't want to be you don't want to be out of this important advocacy that we are doing. So please, let's connect, join the Keep It On Coalition, and let's work together to bring an end to internet shutdowns.
I think mine will just be to reiterate what I said earlier, which is advocacy on internet shutdowns involves everyone, and so let us have everyone involved. Let us keep all facets of the internet involved. That is the political class, the economic class, and the social class involved. And I believe verily that we may be able to achieve certain goals towards ending internet shutdowns in the world.
Thank you, and just to reiterate, what perhaps the biggest lesson that I've learned from this session is the need for coordinating our actions. Because, for example, Vinny has just shared some of the tools that are available that perhaps would have been more efficient in us in helping us to monitor the elections in Tanzania than the tools we adopted. So having that sort of sense to use the network, the existing networks and existing solutions that are there to sort of like help you to efficiently exist within such context. So very insightful context. Thank you all. Thank you to the panelists, Kemal. Very many thanks to you, Felicia. Very grateful for your contributions to this panel, and Victor as well. Very many thanks to agreeing to be part of this panel. And to our participants, to our audience, thank you very much. So I think he has a question, so perhaps, yeah.
So he's been meaning to ask, so we kept interrupting him. So his name is Levi. His surname is Kapungwe. His sign name, if you want to address him, is here. So he says, thank you for the initiative. He wants to ask about VPN. There hasn't been awareness that has been raised to the deaf people about it. They don't know how to use it. So when the internet was shut down some time back, they saw that there was something called VPN, and they don't know is it something for free, but they got to use it. So is there anything that you're doing to help raise awareness amongst such people for them to really understand how to go about VPN?
Yeah, thank you, Levi, and I'm very happy to meet you. I think you said your name sign is yeah, so very happy to meet you. I think Levi raises a very important question around accessibility to tech platforms, and particularly VPN for people living with disabilities. So, Felicia, perhaps a direct question to you. Are there VPNs that are more accessible to people living with disabilities? And perhaps how best can we sort of like create public awareness campaigns targeting people living with disabilities with regards to accessibility for tech platforms?
Thank you, and thank you very much, Levi, for that very important question. What I would say is that under the Keep It On campaign, we have a campaign specifically to, it's called the Shutdown Impact Stories, and we did see how internet shutdowns affected persons with disabilities in Uganda, for instance, during the shutdown. And so we are doing more research in this area to see how we can raise awareness about how it affects them, and also, of course, work with the various technologies to see what support we can provide in that regard. But this is something we've started. We are still exploring and seeing how it will turn out and how much research we'll have to do into that. And so I think that, yes, I'm happy that you got to know about VPNs, but unfortunately nobody raised awareness about it directly with the persons with disability. But I think that that is a great start, and we've actively incorporated that in the campaign to highlight and increasingly talk about how persons with disability, vulnerable communities, women and girls are being impacted by internet shutdowns. And so this is something we'll revisit, and I hope that we'll make a lot of progress and we'll be able to support our vulnerable communities with tools to be able to also come back online when the internet is disrupted.
Yeah, thank you very much, Felicia. At that point, I think we pretty much covered most, if not all of the areas that we wish to have discussed during this session. To our very active listeners, we thank you very much for joining this session. looking forward to future collaborations, looking forward to future networking opportunities, and always happy to support whenever we can with initiatives in Zambia or any other country where they're facing any difficulty with regards to internet shutdowns. And of course, if you're a civil society organization, if you're a human rights defender, join the Keep It On movement, and let's continue furthering this discourse, and let's continue tackling some of these problems that affect our country. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good evening, and I wish you enjoyable sessions that you join after this. So thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. You're welcome to stay for the next session on AI.
No, Shutdown is our expert. What she's on. You're like Madame Pano, chief panelist. She was on this panel.
I'm good, how are you? Where have you been all day? No, what do you mean? What do you mean? I've been sessions all day. Yeah. Uliza huyu. Umettend sessions all? Me agenda session, si mimi you're referring to. Zenye tu uko hapo mbele. That's what you're going with. Mbili pekee. Sini asubuhi na hii. Jana gani? Huh? Shutdown. She's saying you're gonna walk.
Shutdown, I'm here to fight for your economic rights.
She's saying we put you
for your time.
She's saying we put you in all time. And how?
This kind of public dissent.
Even you respect. What did I do on this panel? Come on, you're saying no. Just one hand. Let me grab a second.
Thank you for making a living out of this being panelist.
This is fun. Which session is this?
Tell us how much you're paying.
Cheap labor.
Okay. I still am learning. You were a quick learner. You learn one day, the following day you're on every panel. Okay, we're ready. Tell us.
Tell us about the guy.
We're missing our moderator.
Yes, nothing, right? We are the faithful ones. Someone comes for your panelist later. But I'm impressed that there are people who make conversations. Because in African
Yes.
you would have
Good evening, everyone. It's exactly good evening. It's very nice to see you. It's exactly 4:22 p.m. So that's about 6 minutes after the time that we were supposed to start. But thank you so much for joining us. We're going to get right into the discussion. And our discussion today is around AI, right? And so we're seeing a lot of use of AI in the continent, and not just in the continent, but world over. From autonomous weapon systems to identifying the poorest communities, for the delivery of social funds. A very wide range of use. And so we can clearly see that AI has a potential for good, but at the same time, even speaking of lethal autonomous weapons, it also poses very serious, significant risks, and including risks to human rights. So today's conversation is centered around a couple of things, and why we thought this was important is one, for us to critically look at the potential risks for human rights that are posed by AI. Secondly, also is to just have a broad look into the existing legal frameworks on AI, and not just internationally, but also regionally. Three, we are also very keen to look at the national AI strategies that we have here in Africa, or rather, do we even have them? And if we do, what do they look like? The last thing we are going to also critically examine is the use case for AI. As I have mentioned, we're seeing AI being used for weapons, for the delivery of social funds, but also it's increasingly being used in electoral processes. So we're going to examine that particular use case for AI in the continent, and also specifically in the recent Kenyan elections that were held in August of this year. And with me, I have an amazing panel. I will just let them introduce themselves, to just let us know their name and where they come from, and then we can roll out. I will then invite each of them to make their presentation. So to begin, I'll just pass this microphone.
Thank you so much. My name is Tobegile Matibe. I work for Paradigm Initiative as Partnerships and Engagements Manager, and I'm from Zimbabwe.
Hi, my name is Shutdown. I am the legal advisor for digital rights at the International Center for Not-for-Profit Law, and I'm based in Washington, D.C.
Hi, I'm Tara Davis. I'm an associate at Health Advisory based in South Africa.
And I'm Prisco Onyango, a digital publicity at the Lawyers Hub, and we're based in Nairobi, Kenya.
Thank you to all our panelists.
And now how we will do this, we're going to give each of our panelists around 6 to 10 minutes to discuss a particular topic. So we're going to start with Shutdown, and Shutdown will talk to us about the international legal framework that is governing AI and the potential risks to human rights for AI development or deployment. So Shutdown, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. So before I get started, I just wanted to do a little interactive Q&A with you all. Could you raise your hand if you think that you could provide a definition of artificial intelligence, or you know what artificial intelligence is? Yeah, one? Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to put put you on the spot then. Okay. I am a sociologist. I am an engineer or developer. So I have tried to translate this idea to activities, to students. So it wouldn't be a technical definition.
Just 2 sentences max.
2 sentences. Systems, information systems that can learn based in data. They need that data in order to make predictions based in the possibility of recognize certain patterns and help with decision making.
Anyone else want to give it a go? No? Okay. That's fine.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so I'm glad this conversation isn't a technical conversation about what is AI. That would be kind of like a half-day event, I think. We could spend doing that. But I did want to highlight a general idea about artificial intelligence, which you touched on, which is data. So oftentimes when we think of AI, we think of the machine and the machine making decisions, right? But it's what's behind the decision making really is data inputs and a lot of data inputs. So you know, there's different variations of artificial intelligence systems, from natural language processing to machine learning to computer vision and deep learning. And so these are all different specialties, different techniques for developing autonomous learning systems, but they all have in common that they're relying on the data inputs, and the machine is learning from that data. And they're not learning from data kind of out in the air. They're learning from data that humans are inputting into the machine and teaching the machine certain characteristics about that data that should be important for them, for the machine to understand in order to give accurate outputs. And the machine learning process then is saying yes or no. Yes, the machine, you're right. No, you're wrong in terms of the outputs, so that over time the machine gets better at what it does. And that's going to be important in the conversation we have about AI risks, and you'll understand why in a second. Before we get there, I wanted to talk about ICNL, our organization, and just say, you know, we are an organization of lawyers, not techie people, and really our role, our mission is to support an enabling legal environment for civil society and civic space around the world. And increasingly, digital issues become an integral part of that effort. So then you might ask, well, civic space, civil society, what does that have to do with artificial intelligence? And really, the rights that we work on when it comes to civic space, freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and the right to privacy. These are all rights, fundamental human rights that impact civic space and that are impacted by artificial intelligence. And I'll just give a few examples. One is surveillance systems increasingly rely on automated intelligence systems, artificial intelligence, and that's through both the bulk collection and big data analytics that governments are relying on, and then also the even more targeted interception, relying on AI, for example, with facial recognition, which is one of the more well-known examples of a privacy rights issue. Second is content moderation by social media platforms, whereby their algorithms are prioritizing or deprioritizing